The towering glass facade of Titan Enterprises gleamed under the morning sun, reflecting the hustle and bustle of the city below. Inside, employees moved like clockwork, focused, efficient, and oblivious to the quiet figure who moved among them with a mop and a bucket. Michael Titan, the janitor, blended into the background seamlessly, his presence unnoticed by the very people whose fates he quietly observed. Michael was no ordinary janitor. Beneath his simple uniform and quiet demeanor, he carried a secret that only a select few knew. He was a hidden heir to Titan Enterprises, the son of Richard Titan, the enigmatic founder of the company. For the past year, Michael had chosen to live in the shadows, walking the halls of the very empire his father had built, disguised as a humble worker. His father had taught him a valuable lesson early in life. You can't understand a man's true nature until you see how he treats those who can't do anything for him. That lesson had shaped Michael's decision to step away from the privileges of wealth and power and experience life from a different perspective. While the executives and managers made decisions in boardrooms, Michael witnessed the heart of the company, the employees who kept it running. The janitor's role gave him a unique vantage point. No one paid attention to him. No one thought twice before speaking in front of him. Michael saw everything: the kindness of some, the ambition of others, and the arrogance of those who thought themselves superior. Among all the employees, one stood out: Nathan Carter, the company's secretary. Nathan was a man who thrived on appearances. He dressed impeccably, spoke with authority, and always sought to impress those in higher positions. But when it came to those he considered beneath him, Nathan's true colors showed. One morning, Michael quietly pushed his cleaning cart down the corridor outside Nathan's office. He could hear Nathan inside, speaking to a junior employee in a tone dripping with condescension. "Do I have to explain everything to you?" Nathan snapped. "If you can't handle simple tasks, maybe this isn't the place for you." Michael paused briefly, noting the tension in the junior employee's voice as they apologized and hurried out of the office. It wasn't the first time he had seen Nathan behave this way. To his superiors, Nathan was the picture of professionalism. To everyone else, he was a tyrant. Later that day, as Michael was wiping down the conference room table, Nathan walked in, tapping his watch impatiently. "Are you going to be done soon?" Nathan asked, barely sparing him a glance. "Yes, sir," Michael replied calmly, continuing his task. Nathan frowned, his irritation evident. "You missed a spot over there." He pointed to a corner of the table, his voice sharp. "Honestly, I don't know why we keep people like you around. You're lucky to have a job." Michael nodded silently, wiping the spot Nathan had indicated. He had learned long ago not to react to provocations. Instead, he observed, taking mental notes. Nathan's behavior was a reflection of his character, someone who valued power and status above all else. What Nathan didn't realize was that the janitor he dismissed so easily would soon have the power to decide his future. Behind the scenes, Richard Titan was keeping a close eye on his son's progress. Richard had built Titan Enterprises from the ground up, but he believed that the company's future needed to be entrusted to someone who understood not just the business, but the people within it. Richard had never been one for traditional methods of grooming a successor. He believed in character over credentials, humility over entitlement. Michael's decision to work incognito as a janitor had been his own, but it was one that Richard wholeheartedly supported. People reveal their true selves when they think no one is watching. Richard had told Michael before his journey began. "Go, watch, learn, and when the time is right, we'll see who deserves to be part of this company's future." And so Michael watched. He saw the ambition of those who worked late into the night, the kindness of those who offered help without expecting anything in return, and the arrogance of people like Nathan, who saw their colleagues as mere stepping stones. For months, Michael kept his observations to himself, waiting for the right moment to reveal his true identity. But with each passing day, his conviction grew stronger. He wasn't just there to observe. He was there to shape the future of Titan Enterprises, to ensure that it became a company that valued integrity, respect, and empathy. One evening, long after most employees had left the office, Michael stood by the window in the janitor's closet, gazing out at the city lights. The weight of his secret felt heavier some days, but he knew why he was doing it. This isn't about power, he reminded himself. It's about people. As he turned to leave, he noticed a familiar figure walking toward the elevator. Nathan, carrying a stack of papers, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I'll handle it," Nathan was saying. "Honestly, these people don't know what they're doing. It's exhausting having to fix everyone's mistakes." Michael watched as the elevator doors closed, a thoughtful expression on his face. Nathan had made his intentions clear. He wasn't interested in teamwork or collaboration. He was interested in control. And Michael knew that people like Nathan could either help a company thrive or bring it down from the inside. The time to remain silent was coming to an end. Soon, the real Michael Titan would step out of the shadows. Nathan Carter strutted through the halls of Titan Enterprises with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His sleek suit, perfectly polished shoes, and neatly styled hair made him stand out among the employees. But it wasn't just his appearance that drew attention. It was his attitude. Nathan was a man who thrived on power, and he was determined to climb the corporate ladder, no matter what it took. To Nathan, success was measured by how far you could rise above others, and he had no qualms about stepping on people along the way. The janitor, Michael, was just another invisible cog in the machine. Someone who didn't matter, someone who could be dismissed without a second thought. "Michael," Nathan called out one afternoon, his voice cutting through the quiet of the office. "You missed a spot over there." Michael, who was quietly wiping down the glass doors of the conference room, turned and nodded. "Yes, sir," he said calmly, walking over to the spot Nathan had pointed out. Nathan watched him with a disdainful smirk. "Honestly," Nathan muttered, loud enough for Michael to hear, "I don't even know why we keep people like him around. They should be grateful to have a job." Michael didn't react. Years of working in silence had taught him patience, and he knew that people like Nathan would eventually show their true colors. His job wasn't to argue or defend himself. It was to observe, to understand who deserved to be part of Titan Enterprises' future and who didn't. Nathan, however, saw Michael's silence as weakness. To him, the janitor was insignificant, a man with no power, no influence, and no future in the company. But what Nathan didn't know was that Michael's silence wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. Nathan's hunger for power stemmed from years of feeling overlooked. He had grown up in a modest household, always dreaming of wealth and prestige. When he landed a job at Titan Enterprises, he saw it as his ticket to a better life. But his ambition quickly turned into entitlement. He made it his mission to impress the higher-ups, often taking credit for the work of others and positioning himself as indispensable. To his superiors, Nathan appeared to be a rising star, but to those who worked beneath him, he was a nightmare. "Did you finish the report I asked for?" Nathan barked at a junior employee one morning. "Yes, sir," the employee stammered, handing over the file. Nathan snatched it without a word of thanks and walked away. To him, kindness was a waste of time. He believed that people respected authority, not empathy. But Michael knew better. True leadership wasn't about commands or control. It was about respect. And respect was something Nathan lacked. Behind the scenes, Richard Titan watched Nathan's behavior closely. Richard believed that a person's character was revealed in how they treated those with no power. Nathan's arrogance was a red flag, one that Richard couldn't ignore. One evening, Richard called Michael to his office. "How are things going?" Richard asked, leaning back in his chair. Michael, still dressed in his janitor's uniform, sat across from his father. "I'm learning a lot," Michael replied. "There are people here who work hard, who care about the company. But there are also those who care only about themselves." Richard nodded. "And Nathan?" he asked. Michael paused before answering. "Nathan is ambitious," he said slowly, "but his ambition blinds him. He steps on people to get what he wants. He treats those beneath him with disrespect. Richard sighed. That's what I feared, he said. A company is only as strong as the people who lead it, and leaders who lack integrity can destroy everything. Michael nodded in agreement. He knew his father was right. Titan Enterprises was at a crossroads, and the decisions they made now would shape its future. Keep watching, Richard said. The time will come when you'll have to reveal who you really are. But until then, continue observing. Let people show their true selves. The days passed, and Nathan's behavior didn't change. He continued to look down on those he considered unimportant, barking orders, taking credit, and ensuring that he remained in the spotlight. One day, Nathan caught Michael cleaning the main lobby. Still here, I see, Nathan said with a sneer. I don't know why they keep you around. People like you don't go far in life. Michael met his gaze calmly. I suppose we'll see, Michael replied, his voice steady. Nathan frowned, unaccustomed to receiving anything other than submission from those he considered beneath him. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed, drawing his attention away. Michael continued cleaning, a small smile playing on his lips. Nathan had no idea that the janitor he looked down on was the future of Titan Enterprises. That evening, as Michael locked up for the day, he paused to look at the company's logo etched into the glass doors. Titan Enterprises. The company his father had built from the ground up stood tall, a symbol of success and innovation. But Michael knew that success wasn't measured by profit margins or stock prices. It was measured by the people who made the company what it was. Nathan believed that power came from titles and authority. But Michael understood a deeper truth. True power came from respect, integrity, and the way you treated others. As he walked away from the building, Michael's mind was clear. Nathan would soon learn that appearances could be deceiving. The air inside the main conference room of Titan Enterprises was thick with anticipation. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about a major announcement. Some whispered that Richard Titan, the elusive founder, was preparing to retire. Others speculated that a new CEO would be appointed. Whatever the reason, it was clear that something significant was about to happen. Nathan Carter sat near the front of the room, his chest puffed with confidence. He was sure his moment had finally arrived. After years of maneuvering through the corporate ranks, he believed he was the obvious choice to take on a leadership role. His mind was already racing with thoughts of promotions, bonuses, and how he would reshape the company in his image. Behind him, standing unobtrusively by the door, Michael watched quietly. Unlike the others, he wasn't there to speculate. He knew exactly what was about to happen. The moment he had been preparing for over the past year had finally arrived. The room fell silent as Richard Titan entered. Even after years of stepping back from daily operations, Richard commanded respect. His presence was imposing, not because of his wealth or status, but because of his unwavering integrity. He was a man who had built an empire from the ground up, and those who knew him understood that he valued character above all else. Thank you all for coming, Richard began, his voice steady and authoritative. Today marks a turning point for Titan Enterprises. Nathan sat up straighter in his chair, his excitement barely contained. This was it, his big moment. For years, this company has thrived because of the people within it, Richard continued. But leadership isn't just about making decisions from the top. It's about understanding the foundation of this company, the people who make it run every day. Nathan glanced around the room, a smug smile on his face. He thought Richard's words were meant to flatter the employees before announcing him as the new leader. He couldn't have been more wrong. Richard paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on Michael, who remained by the door. I've always believed that the best way to understand a company is to see it from the ground up, Richard said. And over the past year, someone has been doing just that. Whispers spread through the room as people began to notice Michael for the first time. The janitor? What was Richard talking about? Let me introduce you to my son, Richard announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Michael Titan. The room erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Nathan's expression shifted from smug confidence to utter disbelief. His eyes locked on Michael, who began walking toward the front of the room with calm, measured steps. The janitor? Nathan muttered under his breath, his mind racing. How could this be possible? Michael reached the stage and stood next to his father, his posture relaxed but his gaze unwavering. Gone was the quiet janitor everyone had overlooked. In his place stood a man with purpose and authority. For the past year, Richard continued, Michael has worked among you, observing how this company operates. Not from the boardroom, but from the ground floor. He's seen the best and worst of what Titan Enterprises has to offer. Nathan's hands clenched into fists under the table. All this time, he had treated Michael with disdain, never realizing who he truly was. The weight of his arrogance hit him like a punch to the gut. Michael cleared his throat, his voice calm but commanding. I've seen a lot during my time here, he began. I've seen dedication, hard work, and kindness from many of you. But I've also seen arrogance, entitlement, and disrespect. His gaze landed squarely on Nathan, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Leadership isn't about titles or power, Michael continued. It's about integrity. It's about how you treat people, especially those you think can't do anything for you. Nathan's face turned pale as whispers spread through the crowd. Everyone knew who Michael was referring to. Richard stepped forward again. We value integrity and respect at Titan Enterprises, he said firmly, and we cannot tolerate behavior that undermines those values. Effective immediately, Nathan Carter will no longer serve as Secretary of Titan Enterprises. Nathan's jaw dropped. The humiliation was unbearable. He had been so sure of his rise to power, only to have it ripped away in front of everyone. But Nathan stammered, trying to form a protest. This can't be. It can, Richard said firmly, and it will. This company was built on a foundation of respect and hard work, and anyone who undermines that foundation has no place here. Nathan slumped in his chair, his confidence shattered. The very people he had looked down on were now watching him with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. His reign of arrogance had come to an end. Meanwhile, those who had treated Michael with kindness during his time as a janitor were recognized and celebrated. Promotions were handed out to those who had demonstrated true leadership qualities, humility, empathy, and dedication. After the meeting, Michael stood by the window in his father's office, looking out over the city. You did well, Richard said, joining him. Michael nodded. It wasn't easy, he admitted, but it was necessary. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You've proven that you understand what it takes to lead, Michael. Not just from the top, but from every level. That's what makes a true leader. Michael turned to face his father. This is just the beginning, he said. There's still a lot of work to do. Richard smiled. Then let's get started. And with that, a new era for Titan Enterprises began, one built on the values of integrity, respect, and the understanding that true leadership comes from knowing the people you serve. The atmosphere in the conference room remained tense long after Nathan had been dismissed. Whispers filled the air, employees exchanging wide-eyed glances as they processed what had just happened. The janitor was the heir to Titan Enterprises. No one had seen it coming, least of all Nathan, whose humiliation was now etched into his pale, stunned expression. Nathan sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. All of his careful maneuvering, his efforts to climb the corporate ladder, it had all been for nothing. He'd been outplayed by the very person he had dismissed as insignificant. Michael stood at the front of the room, his calm gaze sweeping over the crowd. He saw everything, the shock, the confusion, the dawning realization in their eyes. But he also saw something else, respect. Respect that wasn't born out of titles or wealth, but from his actions and the values he represented. Michael cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. I know many of you are surprised, he began, his voice steady but firm. For the past year, I've worked among you, not as the heir to Titan Enterprises, but as a janitor. I chose this role because I wanted to see the heart of this company. I wanted to understand the people who make it what it is. He took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. I've seen acts of kindness, moments of dedication, and a deep commitment to our shared goals. But I've also seen arrogance, entitlement, and a lack of respect for others. Michael turned his attention to Nathan, whose face flushed with shame. Nathan, Michael said, his tone calm but resolute, you believe that success was about stepping on others to rise higher. You dismissed those you thought were beneath you. But leadership isn't about power. It's about service. It's about lifting others up, not tearing them down. Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The weight of his actions bore down on him like a heavy stone. He had spent years cultivating an image of success, only to have it shattered in a single moment. Michael continued, addressing the entire room. This company was built on a foundation of respect and integrity. Those values will remain at the core of everything we do. Going forward, we will recognize those who embody these principles, not just in their work, but in how they treat others. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. Today isn't about punishment, he said. It's about accountability. And accountability is what makes us stronger. Richard Titan stepped forward, standing beside his son. As my son said, this is a turning point for Titan Enterprises, Richard said. We will continue to grow and thrive, but we will do so with integrity. The days of arrogance and entitlement are over. As the meeting adjourned, employees began to file out, some still whispering, others deep in thought. Michael stayed behind, watching as Nathan slowly rose from his seat. For the first time, Nathan didn't exude his usual confidence. Instead, he looked lost, like a man who had just realized he'd been living a lie. Nathan, Michael called out. Nathan turned, his expression a mix of regret and bitterness. I suppose you're going to lecture me now, Nathan said, his voice tired. Michael shook his head. No lectures, he replied. Just one question. Nathan frowned. What question? Michael's gaze softened slightly. Why? He asked. Why did you treat people the way you did? What were you trying to prove? Nathan lowered his gaze, silent for a long moment. I grew up with nothing, Nathan finally said. I thought that the only way to succeed was to be the strongest, the smartest, the most ruthless. He looked up, meeting Michael's eyes. I thought kindness was a weakness. Michael studied him, seeing the cracks in the armor Nathan had built around himself. Kindness isn't weakness, Michael said softly. It's strength. It's what builds trust, loyalty, and respect. And it's what makes a leader worth following. Nathan sighed. I guess I've got a lot to learn. Michael nodded. We all do. In the days that followed, Titan Enterprises began to change. Michael and Richard implemented new policies aimed at fostering a culture of respect and empathy. Promotions were no longer based solely on performance metrics, but also on how employees treated their peers. Those who had been overlooked before, the quiet, hard-working individuals, began to rise through the ranks. Their efforts were finally being recognized. The company flourished under this new leadership, its foundation stronger than ever. As for Nathan, he left the company shortly after his dismissal. His ambitions had been shattered, but his story didn't end there. Humbled by his experience, he took time to reflect on his actions and began to seek a new path, one that focused more on learning and less on power. One afternoon, Michael stood by the large windows of his new office, watching the city below. The sunlight reflected off the glass, casting a warm glow across the room. Richard entered, a proud smile on his face. You've done well, Richard said. Michael turned to his father. There's still more to do, he replied. Richard nodded. There always is. But what matters is that you've set the right tone. You've shown them what true leadership looks like. Michael looked out the window again, a thoughtful expression on his face. This isn't just about me, he said. It's about everyone in this company. We succeed together, or not at all. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. That's why you're the right person to lead, Michael. Michael smiled. feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "We're not done yet," he said. "There's still a lot of stories to write, and I want to make sure we get them right." And so, a new chapter began for Titan Enterprises. One built on the belief that true leadership wasn't about titles or power, but about the strength of character and the value of treating everyone with dignity and respect. A legacy that would endure for generations to come. Weeks had passed since the day Michael Titan revealed his true identity to the employees of Titan Enterprises. The shock of his revelation still echoed through the company, but what resonated more deeply was the change that followed. Michael, now formally recognized as the rightful heir to the company, didn't assume the title of CEO. He chose a different path. Instead of sitting at the top of the corporate ladder, he focused on reshaping the culture of Titan Enterprises from within, a culture built on respect, integrity, and empathy. On his first official day in his new role, Michael gathered the employees in the same conference room where he had unveiled the truth. "I'm not here to rule from above," Michael began, standing at the front of the room. His voice carried a quiet authority, one that commanded attention without demanding it. "I'm here to serve alongside you." The employees listened in silence, their eyes fixed on the man they had once seen as just a janitor. "I've seen how this company works from the ground up," Michael continued, "and I've seen the potential we have when we treat each other with dignity and respect. That's the future I want for Titan Enterprises." There was a ripple of applause, hesitant at first, but it soon grew into a loud, heartfelt ovation. People believed in him, not because of his name, but because of the values he stood for. Among those clapping was Pedro Alvarez, a senior manager who had always treated Michael kindly, even when he thought he was just a janitor. Pedro had no idea that his simple acts of respect would one day be noticed by the future leader of the company. Michael smiled as he spotted Pedro in the crowd. He would ensure that people like Pedro were the ones to shape the company's future. In contrast, Nathan Carter's absence was notable. After his dismissal, he had quietly left the company, disappearing from the halls of Titan Enterprises. His ambitions had been crushed, but Michael hoped that Nathan had learned something from the experience. One rainy afternoon, as Michael was reviewing some reports in his office, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. The door opened slowly, and Nathan stepped inside, looking humbled and hesitant. He was no longer dressed in his sharp suits. Instead, he wore simple clothes and carried himself with a quieter demeanor. "Michael," Nathan began, his voice softer than usual. I wanted to apologize." Michael stood, his expression calm but curious. "I was arrogant," Nathan continued. "I thought success was about power and control. But I've learned that I was wrong." Michael crossed his arms, studying the man in front of him. "Why are you here, Nathan?" he asked gently. Nathan took a deep breath. "I want to make things right," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance to learn from my mistakes." Michael considered his words carefully. Nathan had been one of the company's most toxic influences, but standing before him now was a man who seemed genuinely remorseful. "People can change," Michael said slowly, "but change takes time and action." Nathan nodded. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Michael gestured toward a chair. "Sit down," he said. "Let's talk." In the months that followed, Titan Enterprises transformed. Promotions were based not just on performance, but on character. Employees were encouraged to support one another, to collaborate rather than compete. The company thrived under this new culture of integrity. One day, Richard Titan visited Michael's office. "I see the changes you've made," Richard said, a proud smile on his face. "You've created something remarkable here." Michael nodded. "It's not just me," he replied. "It's all of us. The company is only as strong as the people within it." Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes filled with pride. "You've made me proud, son, more than you'll ever know." Michael smiled. "I've learned from the best." Years passed, and Michael continued to lead Titan Enterprises with the same humility and integrity that had defined his journey. His story became a legend within the company. The tale of a janitor who became a leader, not because of his name, but because of his character. Nathan, now a different man, returned to the company in a lower position. He worked quietly, humbly, rebuilding his reputation through actions rather than words. Over time, he earned back the trust of his colleagues and became a respected mentor to new employees, sharing his story as a lesson in humility. One day, as Michael stood by the large windows of the Titan Enterprises headquarters, he reflected on the journey that had brought him there. The city stretched out before him, bustling with life and energy, a reminder of the endless possibilities that awaited those who dared to dream. Pedro entered the office, carrying a stack of reports. Thinking about the future again, Pedro asked with a grin. Michael chuckled. Always. Pedro placed the reports on the desk and crossed his arms. You've done something amazing here, Michael. Titan Enterprises isn't just a company anymore. It's a family. Michael nodded. That was always the goal, he said. To create a place where everyone, no matter their position, is treated with respect and dignity. Pedro smiled. And you've done just that. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Michael knew that his journey was far from over. There were still challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. Because true leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about integrity. It's about respect. And it's about lifting others up so they can reach their full potential. And with that thought, Michael Titan, the once hidden heir, continued his mission to build a legacy that would stand the test of time.